Breaking news. Hidden prophecies inside the Great Pyramid of Giza discovered by scientists. Much has been written and said about the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. When and how was it created and for what purpose? The answer to these questions will vary considerably, depending on who you ask. It's almost like every historian and archaeologist have his or her own version of the Great Pyramid's ancient history. According to one theory put forward by Lewis Spence, there are hidden prophecies inside the Great Pyramid. Lewis Spence, 1874–1955, was a Scottish journalist and occult scholar who wrote several books about Atlantis, Lost Worlds, Secret Ancient Teaching and Ancient Mysteries. In his book, The Symbolic Prophecy of the Great Pyramid, Spence explained the Giza Pyramid of Giza was deliberately built as a monument of prophecy. Several experts studied these prophecies, and one of them was David Davidson, a structural engineer who after 25 years of study of this mysterious ancient monument became expert on the secret nature of their pyramid. The results of Davidson's investigations were published in his book The Great Pyramid, Its Divine Message, in which he illustrates with 80 plates and 97 sheets of archaeological, historical, and astronomical tables, the correctness of the key to the pyramid prophecies which he discovered. Our knowledge about the Great Pyramid of Giza is still incomplete. Other scientists who said they found evidence of prophecies inside the Great Pyramid were John Greaves, professor of astronomy at Oxford, who explored the pyramid in 1637. John and Colonel Howard Vyse, who spent a personal fortune investigating the subject. Egyptian priest Songches of Se and his story about Atlantis were the Shamsahor survivors of a great catastrophe that ended the Ice Age. Mysterious Shamsahor, followers of Horus, were semi-divine kings and keepers of sacred knowledge in pre-dynastic Egypt. According to Spence, Sir John Herschel, the famous astronomer, interested himself in the same problem, and his astronomical knowledge enabled him to make many important discoveries regarding the significance of the construction of the pyramid. In 1859, John Taylor, a London publisher and eminent mathematician, issued a book wherein he revealed the significance of some of the pyramid's dimensions. It was he who revealed an important key in explaining the polar diameter inch in connection with the pyramid's dimensions. Professor Piazzi Smythe, in the years 1864–65, found strong confirmation of Mr. Taylor's discoveries. This professor was followed by Sir William Petrie, the renowned archaeologist, who applied new scientific methods in verifying the great structure and compared the polar inch to the British inch, thereby furnishing Mr. David Davidson with additional keys. Dates prophesied by the dimensions. Lewis writes that according to scientists who found evidence of prophecies, all of the outstanding events of the history of mankind are plainly indicated in charts and diagrams based upon the measurements, structural lines, dimension keys, and cross lines within the pyramid. If the spaces between these crossings are measured in the pyramid inch and associated with years and months and days, and in some cases with actual hours, significant dates are obtained, and by their association with the lines that rise upward or pass horizontally or drop vertically, certain significance is given to the prophetic date. Also, the association of these lines of measurement with certain chamber passageways and strange arrangements within the pyramid helped reveal the nature of the event that was to occur on the date prophesied by the dimensions. Napoleon Bonaparte's nightmare vision inside the Great Pyramid. Napoleon had a horrifying vision in the king's chamber. What did he see? The theory that there are hidden prophecies inside the Great Pyramid is intriguing. Could this explain Napoleon Bonaparte's nightmare vision inside the Great Pyramid? Napoleon's strange encounter inside the king's chamber is still shrouded in mystery. What horrifying images did Napoleon Bonaparte see when he visited the Great Pyramid in Egypt? Was Napoleon given a vision of the future? Here is Chapter 1 of the book. Symbolic Prophecy of the Great Pyramid by H. Spencer Lewis. a visit to the land of mystery. To understand and appreciate both the architectural magnificence and the mystical significance of the Great Pyramid, one must understand something about mysterious Egypt. Among various religious denominations of modern times, Egypt is still called the Land of Darkness. To the students of civilization, and cultural and intellectual development, Egypt ever typifies the one-time center of world culture. To the student of mysticism and all that is weird, alluring, fascinating, and intriguing, the banks of the Nile remain increasingly popular and interesting. Why some should call it the Land of Darkness is difficult to understand, unless we look at Egypt in one period of its very long history and wrongly select that period as typifying its spirit. There are many lands in the world today which at one time rose to great heights in culture and intellectual development and then dropped to a 17 very low place, but none of these is commonly referred to as a land of darkness. From a religious point of view, the Christians and those of more modern forms of religion point out the fact that Christianity has made little headway in Egypt in the past few centuries, and from the Christian point of view this would seem to indicate a land of religious darkness. But such persons forget that Egypt was a land in which Christianity developed one of its earliest foundations, and from which it derived much of its culture and ethics. To the mystic, or those mystically inclined, Egypt does not personify a land of darkness, but a land of sleeping, potent, though dormant, power, with a hidden, secret wisdom and culture that may be fanned to a great flame and become an inspiring source of illumination at almost any period of the present and future years. In its own way it is highly religious, and measured from the broad standards of religion it is not without its beautiful ideals and wonderful contributions to moral and ethical development. The peoples of the Western world have developed many erroneous pictures and ideas regarding Egypt and its people, and there are two sources of information, or misinformation, which are responsible for these erroneous ideas. The first are the reports of the political situation there, with constant intimations in these reports that Egypt is a land of people incapable of properly governing themselves and needing the continued surveillance, protection, and guardianship of a more modern nation. The second source of misinformation are the popular stories and tales told about the country in books or lectures, magazine articles, or feature reports prepared by those who deliberately color their opinions and judgment, or ignorantly record incompetent and distorted viewpoints. The history of Egypt goes back to such great antiquity that actual facts are lost behind a veil of obscurity, and it is only when these facts emerge in their chronological forward march toward more modern times that they take on a form that resembles recognition and establishment. Carefully surveying the history of Egypt, one is impressed with the idea that it is like looking across the country into a dense fog. The more distant the objects we try to discern, the more vague and indefinite they appear to be in form and color, and even in relationship to the earth itself. It is only those things which seem to emerge partially from the fog and come closer to us that give us a correct impression or something tangible to record in our contemplation. If we were to fly over Egypt in a modern plane, as is being flown almost daily at the present time by tourists and those who have important matters to deal with and must make hurried trips to Egypt and return, we would be impressed with the fact that not only is Egypt a very small section of Africa located near its northeast corner, but that it is just a long valley lying on either side of a wonderful river ending at the Mediterranean and having its beginning somewhere in the rugged mountains of Ethiopia or Abyssinia. In fact, were it not for this unusual river, unusual in many ways, the land of Egypt would be a part of the desert wastes of northern Africa. But down through this desert waste nature dug a canal, and allowed the rain waters of the Ethiopian mountains to wend their way northward toward the Mediterranean through this twisting, turning canal. For 1,500 miles this river carries its life-giving waters to the Great Sea, and during the last 800 miles of this distance we have the historically famous and fascinating valley that constitutes the essential heart of Egypt. The part of Egypt that is the most interesting to all tourists, and the most attractive in its presentation of ruins and monuments of fascinating revelations covers a distance along the Nile of about 800 miles south from Cairo, or in other words, a distance equivalent to the valley located in the central portion of the state of California. Because of the annual overflow of this Nile, resulting in inundations which carry 20 down from the mountain's mud and soil, and deposit them upon the sand on either side of the stream, and irrigate this otherwise dry and unfertile area, the civilization of Egypt had centered itself into a narrow stretch of mud and sand land bordering this God-given stream. And because the Nile afforded a cool and very efficient means of navigation, as well as irrigated lands for agriculture and habitations, all of the principal cities of Egypt were built along the banks of the Nile, as were all of the magnificent temples, pyramids, and other strange structures. Entering Egypt by means of the airplane, however, is not the most interesting, nor profitable way to cover any portion of its areas, nor to reach its borderlands. Two very popular methods for Western world visitors are by boat to Alexandria or Suez and thence by train to Cairo, or by train from Palestine. As one arrives by ship at Alexandria, the first sight of land is impressive because of the magnificent bay, the many ships anchored at its docks, and its thousands of small private boats, including the yachts of the wealthy with their white hulls reflecting in the waters, and tinted by the variegated colors on the patchwork sails of the poor man's boats. The hustle and bustle at the docks, accompanied by the fascinating costumes of the Oriental types among those who handle your baggage and operate the traffic 21 conditions at the piers, the unusual railroad trains and the methods of boarding them and fighting for seats in the unreserved compartments, make the first few hours of your arrival in Egypt the beginning of a long drama of endless acts and scenes. The ride through the Delta region with its thousands of small irrigation canals, its flat lands of greens, the strange mud huts of the natives spotted among more modern buildings of stone, the agricultural and dairy industries of this region, and the passing of an occasional ancient landmark, make the short journey from Alexandria to Cairo so fascinating that the few hours pass by almost unnoticed. On the other hand, as one boards the Egyptian train at Jerusalem in the quaint old station where camels are carrying freight and baggage right to the side of the train, and strange signs tell of the departure of the train and its destination in several different languages including Hebrew, and the peculiar-looking cars stand with their high-pitched whistles constantly blowing as a warning, the strange-looking baggage porters, and all the other unique features of the trip make the starting an interesting one after one has spent many fascinating days perhaps journeying through Palestine and Jerusalem since arriving on the great ship at Haifa. As the train moves from Jerusalem toward Egypt, the constant change in the nature of the soil and its products becomes so evident as to hold one in a spell at the window of the compartment of the train. Gradually the rocky surface of the land smooths out into grass and slightly rolling hills, and then as the train approaches the old Phoenician coast of the Mediterranean, at one time the world's greatest center of shipping and navigation, the fertile soil gradually turns into sand dunes and the trees of various kinds that made Palestine so picturesque disappear, and finally in their place we see groves of palm trees. The ride from Jerusalem to Cairo is a one-day journey beginning soon after breakfast and ending just in time for one to enjoy an evening meal at the hotel in Cairo. But in the interval of 10 or 12 hours the sights of ancient, historical places pass before us like a panorama on the motion picture screen. Little by little we leave behind us in Palestine a mixture of ancient and modern civilization, architecture, and industries, and approach the most primitive form of human settlements. Every hour or so the train is halted at gradually modified types of railway station architecture, until by midday we find the stations crudely constructed and peopled by the most primitive types of agriculturists attempting to turn the barren wastelands of sand into some means of sustenance. As the train halts for water and the 23 delivery of mail and baggage, we see in the distances on either side of the train peculiar mud huts built of stalks of sugar cane interwoven with cloth and plastered with mud, out of which come the dwellers of this strange section of the earth. The natives who surround our compartments and peer into our windows and offer us some of their wares for sale are kindly-looking people despite their primitive and poor clothing, and notwithstanding the strange longing that is so evident in their eyes. They appreciate each kind word that is spoken to them even when they do not understand the language. They are appreciative of every business transaction and value highly the Western world money that they receive in exchange for their wares, but seem to resent any idea that they are begging or looking for charity. True it is that a large portion of the natives who flock around tourists at each and every point of rest, paint for us a picture of poverty through their constant solicitations for baksheesh, or in other words, coins of any kind either handed to them or thrown to them from the compartment windows. And at each move made by the tourists when entering a car, automobile, hotel, or doorway, or in picking up or setting down a piece of baggage, or in looking for something or someone, these professional beggars slip quietly to one side, and as if by magic seem to take hold of the doorknob and 24 baggage handles, or whatever the tourist is reaching for, and while offering it with one hand they solicit money with the other, until the process becomes an annoyance and it often calls for drastic action to free oneself from being delayed by a circle of these beggars who would deliberately force one to pay them for freedom of action. But in fairness to the natives of all of these countries in the Near East, it must be said that these beggars, often resorting to tricks or imitating lameness, blindness, paralysis, and other appalling conditions and laughing at you later when you discover you have been tricked, represent a very small portion of the populace. As the train moves on toward the Suez Canal and crosses it at Kandahar, we note that the sun is beginning to set in the west, and as we turn our eyes toward Egypt we can faintly see the outlines of the minarets that rise toward the sky silhouetted against the golden colors of the sun. If our journey is made during the winter months, the most appropriate time for visiting Egypt, it is almost dark when our train arrives at Cairo and our baggage is unloaded, and we enter a taxicab or special automobile to be driven to our hotel. Whether we have come direct from America or other parts of the world to Alexandria by boat and thence by train to Cairo, or whether we have come through Palestine and Syria after having visited the many ancient cities of those lands and thence by 25 train to the great Egyptian city, we cannot fail to be impressed, as our automobile drives us toward our hotel, with the fact that portions of Cairo with its wide boulevards, its parks, its shady trees, its very modern buildings and offices, hotels and stores, its high structures, its multiplicity of automobiles and modern taxicabs, its many people dressed in Western world clothing, and the nature of the hustle and bustle, the electric signs with many of them containing English words, give us an impression that we are in a Western world city, and not in one of the oldest lands of the earth. Standing in the central plaza of Cairo either in midday or at night, one wonders whether this is the Piccadilly or Charing Cross of London, the Place de la Madeleine of Paris, or the center of any other great European city, or possibly Union Square of San Francisco, New York, Chicago, New Orleans, or almost anywhere. Even the trolley cars and the iron posts holding the trolley wires, the awnings in front of the jewelry stores and other places, the theater entrances, the traffic officers and the signals, the newsboys with their newspapers, the drinking places, the hotel dining rooms with their popular orchestras, all seem to be disappointing, for we as tourists expected, what? It is difficult for the tourist to say why he is disappointed. But the next morning, as he is taken by automobile from his hotel through the great square, named after 26 Muhammad Ali, to one of the surf beaches, he finds a replica of what he may have seen in the eastern parts of the British Isles, at Ostend, Biarritz, or Atlantic City, with all of the colorful parasols, bathing tents, concessions and amusements, modern bathing suits, with men and women from every country in the world, mostly of the Western and European type, enjoying the sunshine and warm waves in a manner indicating complete indifference to the fact that they are in one of the ancient sections of a mysterious country. The interiors of the hotels at Cairo impress us because of the great height of the ceilings, the largeness of the spacious bedrooms, dining rooms, and hallways, the balconies and porches with their very helpful shade, the luxuriousness of the oriental tapestries, rugs, and antique settings, and the multitude of servants dressed in long white robes with bright red silk sashes and the inevitable fez as a headdress. Wherever and however one may turn in any part of the hotel, Even in the privacy of one's own bedroom or bathroom, one of these silent moving servants is at one's elbow, or tapping upon the door, or just ready to enter, seemingly anticipating every desire and every necessity. One may step into the hallway to approach the elevator to go down to the lower floor and see no servant in sight. Yet before he can walk 2 feet with baggage in his hands or a parcel under his arm, a dozen of 27 these servants will seem to approach from nowhere, or from out of the shadows of the niches that are set into the hallways, or from around the corner, or perhaps from the very floor itself, and offer their aid. The bedrooms are furnished magnificently, but have a strange appearance with their long windows that open onto balconies, with their Venetian blinds, their velour drapes, and their net-covered beds. The dining room appears like a setting for some banquet in a great palace, with its beautiful carpets, its spotless linen, its great number of silver pieces upon the tables, its beautiful china, its large number of waiters assigned to each section, often 2 to a table, its corners spotted with divans in Oriental style overhung with canopies of rare materials, its opulent hanging lamps of Egyptian artwork, its magnificent chandeliers containing thousands of pieces of crystal, and its soft music constantly being played by Oriental musicians. Its printed menu is a beautiful souvenir, and the food is well prepared and impressively served, and the wines and liquors flow more freely than water. For the people of the Western world cannot enjoy the taste of the drinking water in Egypt, nor is it safe to partake of it. Out in the streets we find the boulevards quite modern, with the side streets spotted with antique and souvenir stores wherein everything that Egypt manufactured in the past is 28 duplicated, and everything manufactured at the present time is offered at reasonable prices. During the winter months the temperature at midday is like that of a fair summer day in New York, Chicago, London, or Paris. The nights often become fairly cool and make sleeping enjoyable. Wherever one goes he finds natives who can speak or understand the English language. Bootblacks, wearing the white robe and sash, are at work everywhere, as are the sellers of strings of beads, souvenir canes and novelties of all kinds. At the curb we are beckoned to patronize open one-horse carriages in which 4 can ride comfortably, or modern taxicabs with the tops lowered to make sightseeing easier. In a few minutes and for a few pennies one can be whisked to the musky section of Cairo, where the narrow, old-time streets are lined with bazaars where one can see the most beautiful specimens of handmade brass vases inlaid with copper or silver, or silken shawls, cotton tablecloths and scarfs, and every conceivable kind of article made out of wood and metal and other things, from small portable chairs to magnificent service sets for the table. One soon learns how to bargain with the men who operate these bazaars. Each bazaar is merely a hole in the wall, and 75% of the merchandise hangs on the outside of the store, where there might otherwise have been a plate 29 glass window, or on tables or chairs, and nearly all of one's bargaining is done right on the street while both natives and tourists stand and watch. The proper procedure usually is to inquire the price of something one desires, but to give it only a casual examination and not reveal one's deep interest in it. Then, having received a quotation, or having been told the asking price, one proceeds to divide that price by the date of the month, then subtract the hour of the day, and then divide the remainder by 2. This then constitutes your first offer, and it should then be followed by some more division and subtraction until a 4th and 5th offer have been made. Then, refusing to accept the merchant's final and last quotation, one turns about and walks away. It is then that the merchant comes and makes his first offer, and then the bargaining begins again. If you buy the article, and have conducted your bargaining in the right manner, you will have paid approximately 1/20th of the price originally asked. Believing that you have been very successful in your bargaining, you are made unhappy a few minutes later by the rival merchant just across the street offering to you the same piece of merchandise from his stock at 1/2 the price you have just paid to the other. And as you wend your way along the streets with their bazaars, your unwrapped package under your arm, most things 30 are carried this way, merchant after merchant will point out to you a duplicate of it possessed by him and which he will sell to you at a lower price, for each one seems to know how much you paid, and before you have left the bazaar district you realize that you might have had 10 shawls for the price you paid for one, or 10 pieces of brass, or 10 other things of similar value. No matter how many times you may go to the bazaars of Cairo, or even of Luxor or Alexandria, and no matter how often you continue to bargain until you have reached what you believe must be the very lowest price, you will find later that you brought your bargaining to a close far too soon. But all of this is part of the fun, the excitement, the pastime of your visit. You always know that you have received full value for the money you have spent, and you feel reluctant to take articles away from these persons at a price that seems to be unfair and unreasonable for, after all, despite their sharp bargaining and their expressions of resentment at your quotations, they are a kindly lot of people. When you find them in repose as you do at the doorways of the great mosques or universities and schools, or at the doorways of temples and grottos, or waiting in the shadows of the pyramid, or elsewhere, you see upon their countenances the unmistakable expressions of sincerity, profound thought, deep inner wisdom, 31 and a mysterious power. Many scenes are amusing, indeed. It appears to be a custom in Cairo for each poor man who has a harem, a household of more than one wife or female, to take his wives and children for a weekly ride on Saturday afternoon. The poor man, and there are so many of them in and around Cairo, usually possesses one mule or donkey, and a large two-wheeled wagon that resembles some of the small hay wagons or hay carts seen in other parts of the world with their slanting sides and long extended planks in the floor of the wagon. The husband of the harem will place all of his wives in the forepart of this little wagon, and attach a large wicker basket or enclosure of some kind on the rear part of it into which he places children under the age of 6 or 7. Then, walking and leading the mule or donkey, he will slowly wend his way around the native sections of the city, and partly out onto the highway to give his family a 2-hour airing and period of enjoyment. The poor fellow at the head of the procession seems to be as poorly fed and as poorly cared for as the animal that pulls the wagon, and the women in the wagon are always dressed in cheap, black material with black veils over their heads and another one covering the lower part of each face, while the children are but half dressed in the cheapest and poorest material. Wherever there are harems owned by the 32 wealthy class, such exhibitions of the family are never seen, and so one is apt to gather the impression that all of the harems of that part of the world are owned by the poorest of men, which is not the truth. But in contrast to this amusing sight, and which should never provoke any outer manifestation of amusement, one constantly sees in the shadows of temples and mosques, and even at the hotel lobbies and stores, the silent dreaming figure of the true Egyptian who is always polite and reserved, and always meditative and impressive, and the restraint of something that is difficult for all but the mystic to understand. He stands with almost utter indifference, or is seated in his cross-legged posture as though viewing the world and the passer-by with keen analysis and contemplation. You feel that he is wondering why they come to Egypt and leave their modern cities behind them, if in them they have all of the luxuries of life and all the conveniences of which they speak. You feel that he is wondering why they come to his land to spend so much money, and to spend it so freely and uselessly as the average tourist usually does. You feel that he wonders whether any of those passing by have seen the real things of Egypt, and have sensed its real beauty, its real powers, and its real possibilities. And as you study him in turn you wonder what profound knowledge he has inherited and what great wisdom he has acquired from his 33 contacts with the mystics and the teachers and the philosophers who still carry on their great work in the hidden parts of each section of this ancient land. You wonder what it will take to awaken suddenly and in the flash of an eye, or the twinkling of an eye, and quicken into action all of the political, mental, spiritual, and mystical power possessed by the learned, quiet, peaceful citizens of Egypt. They do not appear to be suppressed nor even depressed by political or other conditions surrounding them, and while they do not appear either to be satisfied and wholly agreeable to the conditions which exist, they give you the impression that they are biding their time and are awaiting the clarion call from somewhere. They are peacefully and tolerantly, politely and mercifully anticipating some cyclic action, some dawn of a tomorrow when, as in several other periods of Egyptian history, the great and real power of Egypt shall burst forth like a flash of lightning and illuminate not only its own land but all the world. One feels intuitively and instinctively that somewhere in the recesses of the ancient temples, in the hidden and secret grottos beneath the sand, in the archives of the great universities, in the underground chambers of crudely formed huts, there are secret meetings held and secret wisdom preserved and perpetuated, but with it all you sense 34 that what is sleeping and waiting the day of awakening is not a political revolt, a religious uprising, or an expression of intolerance and hatred, but something of peace, something that will manifest in cooperative action, giving all the nations of the world cause for admiration and respect, and bringing Egypt and its true sons once more into the limelight of the world as leaders of cultural thought, or unsuspected mystical powers, and of spiritual fortitude. And as the mystic wends his way through some of the old temples and is escorted by a kind native through mosques and secret places, he feels that his aura has been observed, that his soul has revealed itself to the psychic eyesight of his conductor, and that his love for Egypt, his admiration for the things it once revealed and still possesses, have made an impression. The mystic momentarily expects that he will be taken aside into some secluded chamber where the atmosphere is cool and wholesome, where incense will be burning, where the colors from stained glass windows will make fascinating patterns on the floor, where a great patriarch of the old races of Egypt will be seated as on a throne, where intelligent and cultured natives will be seated in a group, and the behind closed doors the mystic discovered during his journey in the land will be welcomed into some strange brotherhood, or given a key to the 35 mysteries of Egypt, or told what its people anticipate and are praying for. And such thoughts in the mind of the mystic are not fantasies unwarranted and beyond the pale of possibility. Stranger things than this have happened in Egypt when the true seeker, the true mystic, has gone there in sincerity, and in his understanding of the more sacred things of life has allowed his soul to express itself in his countenance and in his reverential attitude, while others have smiled or scoffed and plainly indicated their lack of understanding and sympathy. To a large portion of the world the land of Egypt may still be the land of darkness, but once there was a universal darkness when all was black as night, and chaotic. Yet in the stillness of that night there suddenly came the decree and command, and the word became a law, and the darkness was filled with a great light, and with the coming of the light there came order and system, and into the midst thereof there came life and love. End of chapter 1.